Okay, in this video, we're going to look at how we determine how to find values that would make a trinomial into a perfect square trinomial. So what we have here is, if you look, we've got x squared plus 14x plus c. So c is our constant. That's the c value of our quadratic. And we want to know what number would this have to be equal to in order to make this trinomial a perfect square, so that we could factor it down to just the square of a binomial. So if you remember some of our previous examples, like for example, in the beginning, last video, we looked at this, where it was x squared plus 16x plus 64. So you noticed that 64 was a number squared, right? And it turns out it's 8 squared. And this factored down to x plus 8 squared. Now, when you FOIL this out, whatever number you have here in your binomial has to be the square root of your c value. And you'll notice, if you see this relationship between 8 and 16, it's just half of 16, because we're adding this together. We're just doubling it. Okay? So if we try to work backwards from here, x squared plus 17x plus c, x squared plus 14x plus c, the way that we would find this value right here is we would take our b value and divide it by 2. Okay, that's going to tell us what 1/2 of it would be. And then to find our missing c value, we just square this. Okay, see right here with 16, if we just cut 16 in half, that'd be 8. 8 squared is 64. So that's a really easy method to find the missing value. All you do is you take your b term, divide it by 2, and then square it, and that gives you your c value that needs to be added in order to turn this partial trinomial into a perfect square trinomial. So let's go ahead and give it a try with this one right here. Here we see that b is equal to 14. So if we take b over 2 squared, that's going to give us 14 over 2 and then squared. Okay, now 14 over 2 is just 7. So we end up with 7 squared, which gives us 49. What that tells us is that 49 is the value that we would have to add to this to make it a perfect square trinomial. And what that would look like would be x squared plus 14x plus 49. And that right there is now a perfect square trinomial. Now, what that would look like if we factored that, we just get x plus, and notice the value that we are adding that goes inside our binomial to make it the perfect square is just b over 2, whatever b over 2 is. In this example, it was 16 over 2, so we got x plus 8. Here, b over 2 is just 7, so that's the value that goes in our perfect square binomial. So now we've got x plus 7 squared. So in this example, our c value would be 49. Our perfect square trinomial would be x squared plus 14x plus 49. And writing it as the square of a binomial would just be x plus 7 squared. b over 2 and then squared. Okay? Really simple to do this. Make sure you're jotting all these notes down. Okay? You should not pause it and write them down and rewatch if you haven't written any down yet. Let's look at one other example before I give you some problems. Here's another right here. So find the value of c that makes this problem, x squared plus 40x plus c, a perfect square trinomial. In this case, again, we identify, we see that our b value is 40. So if we take b over 2, that's just 40 over 2, so that gives us 20. And to square that, we're going to get 20 squared, which 20 squared is just 400. So in this example, our C value would be equal to 400. So what that means is that our trinomial would be x squared plus 40x plus 400. That would be our perfect square trinomial. And then to write it as the square of a binomial, we just write x, and then in this case it's plus because all of our signs are positive, and our b over 2 value was 20. So it's just x plus 20 squared. Okay, that's another example of how we go ahead and take our b value, divide it by 2 to get our binomial term, and then square it to get our c value. Now, in all of these examples, they've been nice whole numbers that are evenly divisible by 2. That's not always going to be the case. This can work for any any number, whether it's a fraction or not. So an example of that would be, let's say we had x squared plus 3x plus c, and we wanted to see what our c value would need to be to make this a perfect square trinomial. Well, you just do the same exact process. Nothing changes. So in this case, b is equal to 3. b over 2 would just be 3 over 2. You want to leave this in fraction form. You don't want to write this in decimals because you want to be able to add your numbers, the actual amount, not a decimal that you have to round. So b over 2 would be 3 over 2, but to square that, we would just square both our numerator and denominator. So b over 2 squared would just be 9 over 4. So in this example, our perfect square trinomial would be x squared plus 3x plus 9 over 4. So we've got a fraction as our answer, and that is completely fine. Fractions are just regular numbers. They're completely acceptable for answers. Now to write this as the square of a binomial, it would just be x plus, and then remember, whatever b over 2 was, that's what we put in our binomial. So it'd be x plus 3 over 2, and then squared. And that right there is an example of a perfect square trinomial that has a fraction as a c value, and also a b over 2 value that's a fraction. Nothing wrong with that. Completely acceptable. So what I want you to do is go ahead and solve the problems that come up now, and then go ahead and write the answers to 4 through 6 here. Write the c value that you need to make it a perfect square, and then also write the expression as the square of a binomial, just like we did in the last examples. Go ahead and type those in now.